We're talking NFL Combine, New York Giant needs, New York Giants progress, and everything in between with Coach K. That's Keith Sanchez of the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast. That's coming your way next here on the Locked On Giants Podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and happy to have you with us. As always, as promised, all week long, we are turning our attention to the NFL Combine. And as I promised you, I'm pleased to be joined by this next guest of ours. He is the other half of the dynamic duo over at Locked On NFL Draft. You saw Damian Parson last week. This is Coach Keith Sanchez. So Coach K, he is the other half, and he's here to break down what's going on at the Combine, expectations, and all that good stuff. Coach K, welcome to the Locked On Giants podcast.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited to be here, man. And New York Giants, one of the best franchises in all of NFL football. So we get to talk some draft. We get to talk about how to improve the Giants. They made a playoff run this year, and then next year, may possibly be a little Super Bowl run in there. So excited to talk about the NFL draft.
Hey, I think we'd all sign up for a Super Bowl run if we're in Giants, the land of the Giants here, especially after the last decade or so.
Yes.
But Coach, let's focus on the draft. I want to start with the draft here because, even though the storyline that's been kind of dominating the land of the Giants has been Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley, and we'll get to them a little later on in the program, there is the draft at hand. And I just want to start off by getting your overall take on this class. Where are the strengths of this class as they relate to some of the needs that the Giants have?
Yeah, I think cornerback is a huge need for the New York Giants, and them picking at I think it's picked the mid to late 20s. I think they'll be able to nab a starter right out the gate, right? Like a guy that can be an immediate impact player, because there are probably 7 to 8 corners that probably have first round grades by numerous NFL organizations. And even over at the Draft Network, we have 7 to 8 corners with first round grades. So I think if you're the New York Giants, that's probably a prime position that you can circle to where there's a lot of depth, and it also fits a need for the New York Giants.
What about receiver, inside linebacker, interior defensive line? How does that stack up as far as the depth in those positions?
Yeah, so I think the receiver position, man, we're going to find out. You may have to have me on again in a couple of days because I think a lot is going to be played out with the receiver position when it comes to these guys testing, right? We know about the big three with the receivers with Quentin Johnston, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, and Jordan Addison, but there's another tier, right? Right under that, when you talk about Zay Flowers, you're talking about Josh Downs, and then, obviously Keyshawn Boutte had his situation, but if he can come in here and run a 4.4, then he's another kind of tier 2 guy that may be able to bump himself up to the back end of the first round that may be able to be in play for the New York Giants. So I think there's a top 3 for the receiver position, but after that, I think this would be really huge for the wide receiver position. When it comes to the interior defensive line position, I mean, it's obvious, right? It's Jalen Carter. And then I, in my opinion, I think there's a bit of a drop off, right? I don't know if there are any more elite prospects out of Jalen Carter, maybe Tyree Wilson, and then there are some starters. So the interior defensive line, if I'm the Giants at 20, that may not necessarily be a point where I want to take one, because I may feel like I'm reaching, but maybe in the second and third round, I could possibly grab an interior defensive line. So definitely wide receiver will be something to look out for at the Combine. Cornerback, interior defensive line is okay. And then you mentioned the linebacker position, which is one of my favorite positions to scout. I know it's extremely overlooked by everybody. I'm probably one of the few people that like scouting linebackers, but there's a good bit of guys. Henry To'oTo'o from University of Alabama, inside linebacker, extremely instinctual, fast flow guy, physical, really smart, and that's definitely somebody that the Giants should have on their board to possibly take in that second round.
I want to go back to the receiver group just for a minute because I look at it, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but I see more of a slant towards slot receivers than I do outside perimeter type guys. Do you agree with that, or do you see some of these slot receivers who can basically do both?
No, I agree with you 100%. I think this is a slot wide receiver class. Even talking about Jordan Addison and Jackson Smith and Jigba, that's two of the big three, right? But I'm not 100% sure that they can line up on the outside. Quentin Johnston from TCU, he's the only prototype build, right? When you're talking about plus 6 foot, possibly run a 4.4, and he's consistently played on the outside. So I, in my opinion, I think this class is full of slot wide receivers. So that presents the question of, okay, if I'm drafting a wide receiver that's primarily a slot, can I find one instead of the first round? Can I find one in the second round, third round, and possibly the fourth round to kind of fill that similar void? So for me, in my opinion, I think that the wide receiver position, while it's talented, I'm not sure if there are many true game changers and game breakers at the wide receiver position.
Can NFL schemes, though, maybe open up a little bit more, like a whole different dimension in a slot receivers a game? I mean, maybe, I don't know how familiar you are with what the Giants did with Mike Kafka and Brian Dable last year on offense, but, they were able to get guys who I think a lot of people didn't think would be able to produce as much, and they produced. So I guess what I'm getting at is, can a scheme maybe help some of these slot receivers that maybe the Giants might be looking at and maybe turn them into bona fide perimeter guys?
Yeah, so I think that was something we've seen with the Giants last year, but it's also been a trend in the NFL overall, right? We're seeing these 5'11" slot guys, and what NFL coordinators are able to do, and Brian Daboll, he understands is put these guys in motion. So when you put them in motion, you don't allow the cornerback or the safety or the nickel to just walk right up on them and be able to press them and kind of, work on their deficiencies, right? You put them in motion, and now the cornerback is in a position of having to trail. And you guess what? You put that slot wide receiver who has short area quickness and explosiveness, you put him in space, and that's where he's best served, and he's able to get open. And then now you see like the transition from Justin Jefferson, right, where he was a really good wide receiver, and now we're talking about if he's the best wide receiver in the league because of what the Vikings head coach was able to do. So I do think that is a trend, and that also goes back to the value point, right? Like if you can find a slot wide receiver in the second round and understand, hey, put this guy in motion, right? Put him in motion, and then allow him to get in these stack sets, get into free releases, get up the field, and get open. I think it's definitely a thing. So I'll kind of transition in my focus on not just XY receivers that's playing out on the edge of the perimeter, to these guys that can run really crisp routes in the middle of the field and guys that can simply get open.
Hey, Giant fans, the NFL season might be over, but the NBA season is in full swing, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 if their first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to the point scores to the spread and more. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. One position we haven't talked about, and I think it's still a need for the Giants, is interior offensive line. General Manager Joe Shane spoke to the media on Tuesday. He mentioned that they have some guys that they anticipate they're going to have a competition at left guard and at center. They might also add another guy. I know a favorite of mine at center, and I've been screaming for them to get a legitimate center, a guy who's done it in college, but I really like John Michael Schmitz. I don't know if he's going to last with the Giants, by the time they go on the clock, but who are some other centers that, if Schmitz is gone and the Giants want to add a legitimate center, who are some other guys that maybe they should take a look at?
I could tell you do your homework. We're going to have you on the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, because John Michael Schmitz is my favorite center in this class, man. And for the listeners, man, I had an opportunity to go to the Senior Bowl, and we were on the field, right? So I was able to see him operate with the O-line coach, and then also see him operate with his peers. And the biggest takeaway that I came away with, this guy's a flat-out leader. He's extremely talented, but he's a leader, right? By day 2 practice, this was the guy that was getting everybody lined up. He was calling the water guys to come over. Hey, we got to water the guys. We got to do this drill. Like, he was almost like he was assistant coach, right, already in day 2. And I think that was really impressive. But then I had the opportunity to interview him later on. We had a sit-down interview with him with the Draft Network. And, man, you talk about a calculated guy, somebody that comes off that really loves the game of football. That's John Michael Smith. So I'm all on board with you. If he falls to the Giants, I think they should definitely take him, especially if they need a center. Then another guy that pops up is Joe Tipman, man. He's a 6'6" center, which is rare, right? Usually centers are 6'3", 6'4", but another extremely talented guy, loves to put people in the ground. So I think that's another position, right? You highlighted it, that if in the 20s, if the Giants, instead of going wide receiver, and we're talking about value per position, we know that Brian Daboll, wants to run the football, that they can get a really good interior offensive lineman and possibly a Pro Bowl starter that in the mid to late 20s.
Yeah, and if I'm not, Tittman is from Wisconsin. Do I have that right?
Yes, from Wisconsin. Okay. There we go.
Yes, and they produce some good offensive linemen.
Yes, they do.
There.
I don't know how many quarterbacks they produce, but they produce some offensive linemen.
Yes, they do. Something about that if Penn State used to be linebacker U, Wisconsin is one of the schools that's offensive line U. I guess. Yeah. Now, Coach, I want to ask you about the quarterback situation. Even though the Giants have said Daniel Jones is coming back, you still have, the quarterbacks and how they always affect how maybe the first round is going to drop. Now, I know it's still early. We still have to go through pro days and all that stuff. What's your sense as to how the quarterbacks will fall early in the first round? Do you think it will maybe push some position groups downwards to the Giants, or do you think maybe that, we on the outside are touting certain guys at quarterback, and maybe they're not really first round or high first round picks to where, maybe there'll be a run on cornerbacks, for example. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think, well, with draft day, right? Well, I think all of us as NFL draft fans, football fans, we've learned to expect the unexpected come draft day. But if I had to put my predictive kind of ball cap on, I expect all of these guys to go in the top 10. The potential, that all of these guys, when you talk about Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, Will Levis, and Anthony Richardson, the potential that they have as QB prospects is so high that I think that NFL franchises, they're not going to be able to help themselves from taking a chance on them. So I expect these guys to go into the top 10, and that's fine, right? Because they go into the top 10, it allows the New York Giants, to get more positional need players to fall to them and kind of focus on Daniel Jones, Saquon Barkley, and really building out an entire roster.
Coach, I get a question from a lot of listeners, and I want to ask you as a talent evaluator. The combine has been referred to as the underwear Olympics. There's a bunch of drills that people do, and what do they mean? What do you get out of them? So let me put the question to you: what can an NFL talent evaluator or any talent evaluator get from the various position drills, or are they all just really for show?
Yeah, no, I don't think they're for sure, but you have to apply them correctly, right? You shouldn't draft a wide receiver solely off the base of he runs a 4.3. But if a wide receiver runs a 4.6, you should take that into account and say, hey, well, this may not be a guy that I want to be a vertical stretch guy, right? And you think about Treylon Burks from last year. Everyone came in here, they thought that this guy was a 4.3 type of guy, and I believe he ran a 4.5. And then now you understand, okay, this isn't a guy that's going to pull away from defensive backs. So I have to properly, put him in the right situation. And then staying with the wide receivers, right? We talked about those slot wide receivers running routes. The opportunity that the wide receivers have here, they run routes, right? So you're able to see them sink their hips. You're able to see how they catch the football when they go through a gauntlet drill. So I think there are plenty of things to take away from the NFL Combine. You just have to properly assess them. Unfortunately for us in the draft community, football fans, we pay attention to the 40 time, right? And we want to say that the fastest guy is going to be the best football player, and that unfortunately just always isn't the case.
No, it's definitely not. I mean, the Giants once had a guy, John Ross, who I think set a record. And unfortunately, John Ross couldn't stay healthy for them. So you can't go for that. But that is a good point, certainly. Coach, I want to talk a little bit about, the Giants' current situation. A lot has been said about Daniel Jones. And I quite honestly, I haven't seen such a divisive player amongst the fan base with Daniel Jones. Some people want to move on from him desperately. And some people are like, no, he's the guy moving forward. I don't know how much you've had a chance to watch him, but based on what you have seen of him, where did he take the biggest leap last year? And where can he still grow in order to maybe inch a little closer to maybe top 10 status?
Yeah, so it's tough, right? Because I think his biggest leap was associated with Brian Daboll, and that was putting him in positions that he was most comfortable in, right? And sometimes that's as simple as this: don't stay in the pocket, right? We're gonna get you roll out, move the pocket, and then hey, go through your first progression, second progression, and if it's not there, Daniel Jones, you're a pretty good athlete. Tuck the ball down and run. And I know that seems simple, right? But sometimes coaches don't apply it, right? Like coaches tell you to stand in the pocket for those 2.5, 3 seconds. Don't leave the pocket. Stay in there. You're supposed to be a quarterback. But Brian Daboll did such a good job with that. So the number one thing that I think with Daniel Jones, he simply looked more comfortable, right? Like he looked confident out there as a quarterback. And that's something that can't be overrated and it can't be understated as a quarterback and when you're looking at quarterback prospects. So for me, I think Daniel Jones looked confident. Now I think it's about adding those elements, right? So now we're talking about stacking things, and I think the confidence part is there. Now let's see you throw the ball to different levels of the field, right? Let's see you advance. Let's see you get through those progressions and deliver some of those dime shots. But that also comes with what, like we talked about earlier, the wide receiver position being improved and him having more weapons.
And also the pass blocking, which at times was, especially up the gut, little
Yes,
too much
yes,
pressure
that
coming up the
definitely
gut.
needs to improve.
Yeah, definitely. The other big free agent for the Giants obviously is Saquon Barkley, and Joe Shane again said that just if they have to franchise tag Daniel, they can still find a way to bring back Saquon. If the Giants do have to move off from Saquon, okay, this is a two-parter for you. Number one, when you look at what Saquon did last year, do you see the same guy that came out of Penn State as a rookie and had that award-winning Rookie of the Year campaign? And number two, if they do have to move on from Saquon, can they find a guy in what is considered a deep running backs class to maybe pick up some of the slack that they would lose if they lost him?
Yeah, so the first part is, did Saquon look like Penn State Saquon? And I think yes, right? The only situation with Saquon was that he was injured. It's not like he lost a step and he didn't gain a bunch of weight. There was no loss of love for the game. So we seen a healthy Saquon last year. He just didn't have a torn ACL or ankle injury, and he stayed healthy for pretty much the entirety of the season. And I think that's what you get with Saquon Barkley. When he's healthy, he's a top 3 to top 5 running back in the NFL. Now, when it comes to his role and if it's replaceable, I have to be honest, the way this team is currently constructed, I don't think so, because now you remove Saquon Barkley and you're talking about a top 3 running back. Now you're placing more onus on Daniel Jones, the quarterback, and it's a lower level a lower level running back. I'm sorry. And I'm not sure if that's a really good combination. It's kind of similar to the situation and I have to mention this, and I know I'm on the Giants podcast, but the Dallas Cowboys with Ezekiel Elliott and how he was able to motivate that run game and make things a little bit easier for the quarterback. So I think that they should find a pace Saquon and then add some more surrounding pieces, continue to build this team out through the draft. And then, if Daniel Jones is the quarterback, he'll be able to show you this year, right? Like I want you to see not only repeat what you did, but take a next step, right? 15 touchdowns is, that's okay. Let's try to aim for that 25 touchdowns and you really be the man.
What is the next step for Saquon Barkley? I mean, they didn't use him as much as a pass receiver, which kind of surprised me last year, as they did in the rookie season. And he, to me, the pass blocking got a little bit better with him. He looked like he was a little bit more patient, but, supposedly, and I don't know if this is true, he's shooting for, APY like on par with Christian McCaffrey, which I'm not sure they're the same type of running back. I mean, so what is the next step for Saquon to take, or has he maxed out, do you think?
Yeah, so I'm so happy you mentioned the pass protection, man, because my running back coach when I was at LSU, Coach Kevin Falk, he had the opportunity to work with Saquon this offseason, and that's one of the things that they worked on was pass protection, right? We're talking about being a more well-rounded back, and Kevin Falk, he lined up next to Tom Brady for 10, 12 years, so you better know how to pass protect. And so we talked about that, and he talked about Saquon Barkley improving, and in Saquon, in those discussions, right, he talked about improving in pass protection, one, but then also learning the next level of the game. And I think that's something that's so huge. So understanding what the linebackers are going to do, what the safeties are going to do to make you a more effective football player, and finding the little details in the game to just help your team win. We know that Saquon is a superstar athlete, right? Like bar none, 6 foot, 235 pounds. He does rare things, but I think that players can always develop mentally. So I think that's the next step for Saquon, just the mental part of the game.
How tricky is it though with a running back? I mean, they generally have short shelf lives. There are exceptions, the Adrian Petersons of the world, for example, that can, make a career out of it. But you start to see that decline. So, I mean, if you're the Giants and you're now trying to figure out, okay, do I sign Saquon for 5 years? Do I sign him for 3 years? I mean, how do you kind of weigh the pros with the cons and come up with a solution that kind of works for everybody?
Yeah, so I always say this: pay the running back for the role that they currently serve on your team. So to me, in my opinion, Saquon Barkley, and probably a lot of people's opinions, right? He's the best player on that offense. So what I would do is, if it's a 3-year contract, because year to year, running backs, like you said, they're injured, they get hurt. I would front load a contract, right? Try to keep him there for 3 years, make him one of the highest paid running backs, but make the contract shorter. As far as in terms, right? So that way you're not paying him for the next 5-6 years, but give him what he's worth to your team at this moment. And I think the front office, while they're paying Saquon Barkley, they also need to be thinking about, in 3 years, we're going to be transitioning from this player possibly, because he's going to wear down. The running back position is extremely tough. So that way you kind of gives you a buffer, right? You pay Saquon, he can carry your team for the next couple of years, but while you're also still looking for, wide receivers, offensive line help, a better defense, possibly a quarterback in the future. So I think that's the proper transition for the New York Giants right now in regards to Saquon Barkley.
All right, now I want to ask you about what I consider, quote unquote, secondary needs for the Giants and how the draft stacks up. And I reluctantly use the term secondary needs because a need is a need.
Yeah.
But that being said, I want to talk about the outside linebacker or edge rusher group, because the Giants have a good pair in Kayvon Thibodeau and Azeez Ojulari, assuming that they can both stay healthy. But they don't really have, in my opinion at any rate, a good number 3. And I go back, I've been covering the Giants for over 30 years now. And one thing that the 2007 team had in common and the 2011 team, and actually you could go back to 1986 and 1990, is they were at least 3 deep as pass rushers. And I don't know, on the edge. I mean, they have Leonard Williams, don't get me wrong, but I'm talking about on the edges here. Yes. So that being said, Ellerson Smith, who they drafted a couple of years ago, hasn't been able to stay healthy. O'Shane Zimenez is going to be a UFA. I'm not sure he's back. Are there some good pass rushers, outside linebackers that maybe can round out that Thibodeau, Ojulari attack? And, I know people generally say, oh, you have to get a pass rusher in the first round, early in the first round, but sometimes you can luck out and get one later on in the draft. Do you see any that might be a good fit for the Giants?
Yes, I think this fills out perfectly for the New York Giants because, like you said, they already have their 1-2 punch, right? So there's not necessarily a need to go after one in the first round. And in this draft, what I've seen, there are a ton of guys that I have late 2, early 3-round grades on, and that falls out perfectly for the Giants because, like you said, it's not a primary need, but it's a secondary need, and they can definitely find a guy in the late 2nd, early 3rd round, and they're probably 10 or 15 guys, and this is another position, just like the wide receivers. I'm thinking that the combine testing is going to help separate some of those edge defenders as far as, the height, length, 40 times, movement skills in person. So the Giants are in a great position to add that 3rd and 4th edge rusher in this class that fits their scheme because, like I said, there's probably 10 or 15 guys that fit that exact bill.
In terms of, the defensive interior, we talked a little bit about it before, but I want to ask you about Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams. Leonard Williams had some injury issues, missed some time for the first time in his career last year, but still very good,
Yes.
two-way threat, can stop the run, can play the pass. Dexter Lawrence just absolutely exploded. I mean, finally somebody listened to me. I've been screaming to move him back to nose tackle, and they finally did. Look at what happened. I got lucky. But
no, that's talent. That's talent. You can't undercut yourself. That was talent right there.
But anyway, I mean, when you look at that tandem, Dexter and Leonard, I mean, what makes them so dangerous, and what can the Giants do to maybe supplement that group? Because you can't play those guys 90% of the time like they were, starting to do towards, the end of the season there. I mean, you're going to wear them out. So how important is a rotation, and what do you think is a good number percentage-wise of the snaps to keep those guys from not wearing out?
Yeah, so I think they complement each other because they have different assets, right? Like you talked about Dexter Lawrence being a rough stuffer, run stuffer, but also being able to collapse the pocket, and then Leonard Williams being more of a guy that can get up the field. He plays with power. He's also physically dominant, but they have their specific roles, and I think that's very important because if you have two guys that strictly get after the quarterback, then you're kind of missing in the run game, right? If you have two guys that's run game, you're missing kind of pass rushers. But those guys, they're well-rounded players overall, but they also complement each other because their best traits they complement what the other may lack just a little bit in. So I think that's why they're so successful. And then speaking, talking about complementary pieces, the way the NFL game is now, I'm all for adding. If you have a run stuffer, continue to add to pass rushers, right? And you talk about a percentage of what you want those defensive linemen to play. I think somewhere around your starters 60 to 70%, right? And then now you want to start throwing in those rotational guys so they can start getting some snaps, start developing them. But then also in the fourth quarter, you want to keep your best players fresh, right? So that second and third quarter range is where you really want to put in your your second and third rotational guys to keep your starters and your best football players, your Pro Bowlers, healthy and ready to go for the fourth quarter.
Okay, now, Coach K, I'm going to put you on the spot, so I
Uh-oh.
apologize in advance here,
Okay.
but give me some of your sleepers who you think nobody's talking about, but who maybe the Giants might have their eye on.
That was definitely, oh man, you definitely put me on the spot. You definitely put me on the spot. Okay, so let's go with, and some people are talking about him, some people aren't. I'm gonna go with Felix and Duke Uzoma, Kansas State edge rusher. When we talked about the edge guys, I think he's a prime candidate to find in the third round. Wide receiver help, man. Check out my guy, Iowa State. Yes, I said Iowa State. Xavier Hutchinson, 6'3", 200 plus pounds. This guy, I think it was back-to-back seasons of catching over 100 footballs, so the production is there, and he's just a good football player. We talked about route running, separating. He's a big body, that gets open. He understands short area quickness and running routes. So Xavier Hutchinson is definitely a wide receiver that people should be circling on the board. So those are my two guys that I have circled as like, hey, these guys are falling as underrated prospects, and that the Giants should definitely look after.
Okay, fair enough. And then again, I'm gonna kind of put you on the spot here because there's
Okay.
always a curveball that comes out of left field. What do you think? And when we talk about curveballs, usually the NFL community sees things a little differently than we do on the outside. And there's always a surprise. If you had to guess, what do you anticipate might be the thing that has people going, "Whoa!" on draft night?
Oh man, oh man, oh man, oh man. Let's see. I think a wide receiver goes a lot higher. I'm going to predict that Quentin Johnson comes here, he tears it up, and he's a top 5 overall pick in this draft.
Okay, good enough. Hey, listen, at this point, anything can go, right?
Anything can happen.
And,
Like I
and
said,
I'm sure the NFL doesn't even know how it's going to play out just yet because still a lot of scouting to go on. Coach K, appreciate you. You do a
oh, thank you.
fantastic job with Damian Parson over on Locked On NFL Draft. Folks, if you are not checking them out, why not? They're so good. This is draft season, folks. These are two guys you want to be checking out on a regular basis. Again, they're on the Locked On NFL Draft podcast. They're a brand new hosts. And we've been hopefully kind to welcome you guys. We haven't made you get the coffee or anything like that. So.
No, everything has been good.
All right. Well, Coach K, I appreciate you coming on with me. Giant fans, thank you for tuning in to the Locked On Giants podcast. Keep it here all week. We will continue to bring you coverage from the combine, as well as the latest news, notes, rumors, analysis, all the good stuff. I'll bring it your way. We'll see you tomorrow, Giant fans.